Hello everyone, it's your Peacekeeper coming at you with a premium ship review? Well, okay, so Duke of York, it's a premium, it was a buy it if you want it, free if you want it ship. It was part of the North Cape campaign, and it's one of 4 Tier 7 battleships for the Royal Navy. I'm sure at some point in time it will return back into the premium shop for you guys to buy if you didn't get it through the campaign. But one thing is certain, the ship definitely has an interesting history and it's worth going over that. Because Duke of York is a King George V class battleship, we're not going to go into the design history because I went into that in depth in the King George V video. So I'll put a link to that down in the description so that you guys have that if you want to hear more about the design history. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive right into the service history of Duke of York. One of Duke of York's first major missions was to carry Prime Minister Winston Churchill to the United States for a meeting with President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And after accomplishing that mission, she began her full shakedown cruise near Bermuda, and then later returned to Scapa Flow in January. From there, she began escorting convoys in the Arctic to prevent their sinking from the German battleships Tirpitz. On convoy PQ-12's escort, Tirpitz had actually sortied, but the aircraft carrier Victorious, which was with Duke of York, managed to drive off Tirpitz without causing any damage to Tirpitz. Later, she'd escort convoy PQ-13 before being sent to Gibraltar in 1942 as the flagship for Force H for Allied landings in North Africa. During her actions there, she was attacked a few times by Italian aircraft, but they were unsuccessful in actually reaching Duke of York thanks to the accompanying aircraft carriers with her. Returning to the north, she participated in the attacks on Spitsbergen and the Kola Inlet in the Arctic as a distraction from Operation Husky, which was the Allied invasion of Sicily. She was joined by several U.S. ships as well, including the USS Alabama, USS South Dakota, and the USS Ranger. In 1943, the chess pieces that would lead to Duke of York's most famous engagement were already moving into place. Scharnhorst was moving to Norway to attack convoys, and Tirpitz was already there. On Christmas Day in 1943, Scharnhorst would set sail, escorted by 5 destroyers to engage Allied shipping headed to Russia. With Duke of York was the County-class heavy cruiser Norfolk and the Town-class light cruisers Belfast and Sheffield. Shortly after 0900 hours in the morning, they contacted Scharnhorst, and 2 hits from the escorting cruisers managed to knock out Scharnhorst's radar. Scharnhorst retreated due to the bad weather and the lack of ability to return fire due to not being able to know where the ships were at because her radar was gone. Contact was made again shortly after noon, but no damage was done to Scharnhorst, but resulted in Norfolk losing a turret and her radar. Scharnhorst dispatched the escorting destroyers to attack the convoy, while she returned to Altafjord in Norway. Duke of York and her escorts, as well as Force 1, continued to pursue Scharnhorst, and anticipated making contact again in the evening, but due to a course change by Scharnhorst, Duke of York had to change her course to actually intercept the ships, and they intercepted each other earlier than anticipated. Information gathered from HMS Belfast was what allowed Duke of York to position herself successfully to engage. Both formations began engaging Scharnhorst by firing star shells to light up the Scharnhorst. Scharnhorst was actually taken by surprise with this, as her guns were turned to the normal cruising position like we see here, Duke of York here in port, with the guns facing forward and aft. And there was a bit of a delay before Scharnhorst could actually return fire. Duke of York had closed to just 12,000 yards, or roughly 11 kilometers, and opened fire with a full 10-gun broadside, which scored a hit in its first salvo. Scharnhorst returned fire, but was able to hit Duke of York twice, which disabled the main radar, but otherwise caused minimal damage to Duke of York. The battle continued, and at 16:55 hours, or 4:55 p.m., a salvo from Duke of York landed a single shell which silenced the forward batteries of Scharnhorst. By 1824 hours, or 6:24 p.m., the range had nearly doubled to 21,400 yards, or 19.6 kilometers. One of Duke of York's final salvos at this range struck Scharnhorst's armor belt, penetrated and took out the #1 boiler room, which slowed Scharnhorst down enough for the pursuing British ships to catch up. Duke of York's escort destroyers launched a successful torpedo attack on Scharnhorst, which landed 4 torpedo hits out of 28 launched. To give you an idea of just how inaccurate torpedoes were during this game's time frame. This further slowed Scharnhorst and allowed Duke of York and the cruiser Jamaica to get into range again. Opening fire at a range of 10,400 yards or 9.5 kilometers, 10 more 14-inch shells from Duke of York silenced the remaining secondary batteries and main battery on Scharnhorst. She'd be finished off by the escorting destroyers of Duke of York, which fired a close-range torpedo spread that caused a bad port to list. At 1945 hours, or 7:45 p.m., Scharnhorst capsized and quickly sank after 10.5 hours of combat and evasion of the British fleet. With the sinking of Scharnhorst and the immobilization of Tirpitz due to several attacks on her, Germany pulled its remaining ships back to home waters, which reduced the need to keep heavy units in the Arctic on behalf of the Allies. Duke of York was transferred to Scapa Flow and then on to the Pacific. But by the time she reached the Pacific, the war was basically over. Duke of York joined with Task Force 37, which comprised of 3 U.S. aircraft carriers, and escorted them for air raids in Japan. She would join King George V and the U.S. Pacific Fleet for the surrender of the Japanese in Tokyo Bay. Post-war, she would sail to Hong Kong to accept the surrender of the Japanese garrison there, and then on to Plymouth for overhaul as the flagship of the British Pacific Fleet. She would serve until April of 1949, where she would be put on reserve. On May 18, 1957, she was ordered to be scrapped and subsequently scrapped. In terms of her in-game playstyle, Duke of York and King George V are basically the same ship overall. There's really not much differences in the way that they play. Both ships have very good HE, both ships have very good AP, they both have very good concealment and pretty good maneuverability for a Tier 7 battleship. And she's really only let down by the fact that she's just covered with 32mm, well, not even 32mm, 25mm plate everywhere, and she just eats high explosive damage like crazy. She eats normal pens like crazy, even though it's not possible really to citadel her. And while she can be a lot of fun to play, I do have to, point out that there are times when it's extremely frustrating. Yes, you're a Tier 7 battleship, but when you get up-tiered to Tier 9 matches, it's very difficult to be effective due to, just the lack of armor everywhere and the prevalence of high explosive, shell fire from, well, just about everything now, including battleships. But Duke of York does have one added change over her tech tree counterpart, and that is hydroacoustic search. And it is pretty effective hydroacoustic search. You're detecting ships out to 4.2 kilometers and torpedoes to 2.97 with basically 3 kilometers. So ships at 4.2, torpedoes at 3, and that is very powerful. It allows her to be a little bit more aggressive when dealing with destroyers in the cap. And I personally think that Duke of York is a much better ship than the King George V is because of it. Now, it loses out on spotting plane and aircraft, but quite honestly, I don't miss them. I really don't. The Hydro, it has a pretty good action time. It's active for 94 seconds, which is pretty dang good. You get 3 of them. The one thing that kind of like crowns Duke of York's, pinnacle, well, it crowns the Duke of York in the way of, you guys remember that during testing there was a lot of complaints from the community contributors about battleships without heals, and so the ship does have a heal, and it is the standard Tier 7 repair party consumable. It's not the British super heal, but the ship also loses out on the normal repair party, is my understanding. So it is in effect King George V, but with Hydro. Oh yeah, and this really awesome Arctic camo. I mean, I gotta give Wargaming credit. This looks really sweet. I like the way it looks. I also like the fact that you can see like the tracks on the deck where guys were walking to various points on the ship. It's just a cool little camo just to kind of float around and look at. It's enjoyable. Of course, for those who don't like that or weren't able to get it through the campaign, it does come with the typical Admiralty camouflage scheme here. But I prefer the Arctic one, mostly because it looks ridiculous on maps when it's the warmer weather maps. Anywho, let's go look at some stats. She has 60,500 hit points, up to 381 millimeters of armor. That's going to be at the belt line. The torpedo damage reduction is 24%, which is okay. It's not the world's greatest. It's actually on the lower end of battleships, but there needs to be something to balance out that high explosive spam. The main battery is 10 14-inch barrels, but they're in 2 quad turrets, one quad turret at the very front and one at the very back. And then there is a twin turret here mounted in a super firing position over the front barrel turret. They have a 18.1 kilometer range, reload time of 29.5 seconds, 180 degree turn time of 38.3 seconds, so a little slow on the turnaround, but, you know, the ship doesn't need faster turning turrets, trust me. 41% fire chance on those HE shells, which do 6,100 damage. AP does 10,500 damage, and both of them moving out at the same velocity, 757 meters per second. Both AP and HE is viable on this, so I would strongly encourage people to use both, and we'll see a lot of AP used in the battle video. Secondary battery, it does have 8 dual 134mm or the 5.25 inch batteries. These are standard affair on the King George V class, so no change really there. In terms of secondaries, they have a 6.3 kilometer firing range and 8% fire chance, 6.7 second reload time, which is really not that good. But they were also pretty mediocre gun mounts too in real life. So, anti-aircraft defense, those 5.25 inch guns also serve as your dual-purpose gun mounts. 5.4 kilometer range there. It steps down into several of the 40mm pom-pom guns. We have 8 octuple ones. That's 3 kilometers in range. Then we have 6 quadruple 40mm pom-poms. But of course, the British were not without using their 40mm Bofors, and there are 2 quad Bofors mounts on board the ship, mounted towards the middle rear. And then we have a bunch of Oerlikons, so we have 8 dual 20mm Oerlikons and 39 single 20mm Oerlikon mounts. And that rounds out the anti-aircraft defense, of course, 2.4 kilometers for the 20mm. 4.2 for the Bofors, 3.0 for the pom-poms, and then the 5.4 for the 5.25 inch. Max speed is going to be 28 knots without the speed flag. And 790 meter turning radius, 14 second rudder shift time. Detection range by sea of 12.2 kilometers. That's going to be with concealment expert on the captain. 10.8 kilometers by air. And speaking of modules, let's go look at modules, shall we? In the first slot, I am running Auxiliary Armaments Mod 1 for the doubling of the hit point pool of my anti-aircraft gun mounts, which is really the reason why I'm running this skill. But I suppose if you do occasionally get into secondary battery range, adding a little bit of extra survivability to your secondaries is also a good idea. You could also run Main Armaments Mod 1 for the 20% reduction in your main battery being incapacitated, as well as increasing their hit point pool by 50%, and decrease the time it takes to repair them by 20%. This is going to be beneficial if you play the ship at very close ranges with AP. As you can see, the turret faces are flat, which means that any shells that hit the turret and hit this front face, which is thick, it's 330 millimeters, but that's by no means impossible to penetrate through. It would be a good idea to run Main Armaments Mod 1 if that's your preferred playstyle. Of course, if you don't wish to go hood, there's Magazine Mod 1 for the 70% reduction in the chance of your ship being detonated. Of course, if you're really worried about that, detonation flags would be a much better choice, but if you don't have any, there's Magazine Mod 1 for you. In the second slot, I'm running Damage Control Systems Mod 1 for the 3% reduction in the risk of flooding, as well as a 3% reduction in the damage received when a torpedo hits the torpedo defense system, which is basically only a midship. And none of these other mods are really all that useful on a battleship, since you don't lose your engine or your steering gears that often. Usually when you do, you can tank a couple hits from enemies before your damage control party gets up to repair it, so neither of these two options are something that I would personally run. In the third slot, I am running Aiming Systems Mod 1 for the 7% reduction in the dispersion of your main battery, as well as, the secondary battery firing range increasing by 5% and a 5% reduction on the dispersion of that. That's a nice little side benefit, but I don't really need that for the ship. The ship's secondaries really aren't that effective. So as you can imagine, secondary battery mod 2, I wouldn't personally recommend it. Now, there are going to be those who want to run an anti-aircraft build, and if you do, AA Guns Mod 2 is your button of choice, and that's going to push out your anti-aircraft firing range by an additional 20%. And main battery mod 2, the decrease in reload time isn't worth the increase in traverse speed in my opinion, so I personally would not run main battery mod 2. In the fourth and final slot, you can see I'm running Steering Gears Mod 2. This is a 20% reduction in your rudder shift time. I personally run this because I would much rather avoid incoming fire if I can, or at least move to mitigate as much of that damage as possible. You are a big, slow battleship, so I know somebody's going to say Damage Control Systems Mod 2 is a good choice for the 15% reduction in the time it takes to extinguish a fire, as well as 15% reduction in the time it takes to recover from a flooding. Either of those two options are pretty viable. Propulsion Systems Mod 2, really not that useful, since this battleship's still going to take forever to get up to speed, and still going to, not really need to be stationary that often. And if you are, it's usually at a point where you are undetectable for once you stop firing. So, personally, I don't think Propulsion Systems Mod 2 is the button of choice. Of course, captain skills, you can run pretty much any captain skill build you really want. Check out my Royal Navy Battleship Captain Skills video for more information on builds that I'm running. You can see here I'm running at least the start of my standard, what I would call the US hybrid build: preventative maintenance, expert marksman, superintendent, concealment expert, advanced firing training, basic firing training, adrenaline rush, which is what I generally speaking run on battleships. I find it gives you a good mix of both anti-aircraft capability as well as survivability. Alright, enough talking about this in port. Let's go look at it in a battle video. Alright, so Duke of York being a Tier 7 definitely benefits heavily from the Tier 7 matchmaking, which predominantly sees Tier 5 ships, and it's a fantastic matchmaking. Duke of York does alright when up-tiered. Generally speaking, though, ships don't do that well when up-tiered. There's always issues surrounding that. Of course, we're rocking the Arctic camo on the map is Trident, which is not in winter climates, so this is very, very fascinating. But, yeah, you can see I spawned in the port, which is kind of cool. Now, Neighbors does the same thing sometimes. You'll get stuck in the port there, and it's kind of neat when it happens, so that's that. So the map mode is Epicenter, which, if you've not ever played an Epicenter match, this could be an interesting little exposure to it. Basically, there are 3 capture points, and the third capture point is in the very, very middle of the map. And this map on Epicenter, I actually don't mind. It's not Tears of the Desert, which is legitimately the worst Epicenter map currently, or at least was. I hear that they either have reworked it or are going to rework it. But I think personally, Epicenter as a game mode is interesting. It forces people to compete over the same objective, and it forces in a little bit closer and a little bit more action-packed fight And I like it. It's fun. The problem comes when people are not willing to actually push and fight over the middle. Usually what ends up happening is the middle tends to be this destroyer camping fest, and that's okay if you're the destroyer and you're the king of contesting caps like the U.S. Navy destroyers are. But the one thing that always has stuck out in my mind about Epicenter is that the map choice makes all the difference. If there are no places to get away from the engagement in the middle of the map, it's bad. Look at what Tears of the Desert was, or Ocean Epicenter, for those of us who played that briefly. Yeah, not fun. Not fun at all. So we're going to start off, we're headed off to the west side of this map now. King George V, like I said before, the King George V and the Duke of York are no different in their ability to use AP, so it's worth checking out. Was kind of hoping that Leander there would present a very favorable broadside profile like this Omaha is. Okay. Can we get a delete key? Shot is out. Pretty decent dispersion, all things considered, and no. We only managed to hit with 2 shells, surprisingly enough. Those 2 shells did only 2,100 damage. I wonder what would have happened if I would have fired AP. Probably nothing good. So, using King George V stealth, we briefly disappear. Not really going to be disappearing for a long time. Ooh, Miyoko. Okay, broadside Miyokos are also just as enticing as Omahas are, so very, very soft citadels, and, well, why not? Ooh, almost clipped our Cleveland. Interesting. And, well, 11,180 damage just from 3 normal pens. No citadel hit there. That's alright. 11,000 damage is still pretty respectable. That's still more than just the single citadel hit would have been. And he's still sailing broadside, so okay, fine. You want another salvo? Let's go for another salvo. Eventually I'm going to land a citadel hit and you're going to regret this. Yep, like that. And Dev Strike. Double citadel there, so AP still viable. We have Fuso, we have an Omaha that is starting my snow-covered deck on fire. Ouch. So, like I said in the first part of this, there is always going to be this issue of, durability even while angled. So that shot there that I took, I was pretty well angled, but not angled enough. So there's 145 damage there on that Fuso. He was broadside, I was broadside to him, we were both reloading. Now his reload is quicker, he has a 25-second reload to my 30-second reload. And you also see on the map there is a Tier 7 Gajimata over here that we also need to worry about. But before we do that, we've got an Omaha to shoot at. Floating citadels are always fun to shoot at, except for when the citadel doesn't actually, you don't actually get the citadel hit. That just is more frustrating than it is anything. Another salvo out, and ooh, Omaha is turning. Well, 4,200 damage, 4 overpens. It was a good shot. We do have our hydro up and running because that Gajimata is around. Deepwater torpedoes are very, very, very difficult to spot, so anything that can be used to spot them, the better. Well, the Omaha was turning broadside there, but this Leander, just exposing the right level of profile, very close, which means the AP is going to do some work, and it doesn't. It lets me down. Should have just shot it at the Omaha, as I say. Up to 57,749 damage. You can see here we're kind of hovering in this, what I would consider close range. It's... I don't want to say it's brawling, because I'm not... You notice what I'm picking to choose, what I'm engaging at these close ranges is predominantly cruisers. There's not a lot in the way of, battleships in the area that are engaging me. Okay, so another shot out at the Omaha, turning away from the torpedoes that are hydro spotted. Ooh! Yes, Citadel hit and a sink. So there is our third Citadel hit, and you notice that we have not yet used high explosive. What is this madness, you might be asking? Well, we are using the ship's, I don't want to, it's not brawling capability, but we are using the ship's effectiveness as an anti-cruiser weapon to bully their cruisers out of the cap here so that our 3 destroyers can actually get into this fight. Unfortunately, they're not willing to hang out and play, so, well, there's Scharnhorst. That's a pretty typical engagement. I don't forget what forget why I looked at the... Oh, I know what it was. I was looking to see what the other destroyer was on their team. Got a Gajimata there. It's always got to be cautious around because things like that happen where he ends up taking out Gneisenau. We are spotted by aircraft briefly, and so now we're gonna loop back in. Didn't even see you on the other side of that island. I don't know who's he talking to. I don't know. But we have Schlachtschiffe Bismarck is in a Scharnhorst. I wonder. Anywho, we're gonna keep pushing into this into the cap here. We're gonna try and get ourselves in a decent position. Maybe bully this Gajimata around a little bit. But the thing to remember is that ship is very good at killing destroyer or battleships, and those deep water torpedoes are definitely something to be feared. So we don't want to get so close that we get spotted and then end up not having hydro available. So we got about 13 seconds, which we can use effectively. Ooh, broadside Leander. You can see there I did a little bit of an up-down motion there to try and get as much saturation of the area as possible, depending on how he moved. Not really sure that was worth it. But the Leander manages to live yet another day thanks to Citadel overpens and dispersion. Occasionally you'll get some really wonky dispersion, but then when they do things like this, it just makes me scratch my head like, homeboy, I mean, I guess, but look at that. 2 more overpens for 2100 damage, like, no! I just want you to go away, Mr. Leander. And then here comes our Leander. Still, oop, there's the Gajimata. So thankfully we've got our hydro up and running. Bouncing shells. There's the first set of torpedoes from the Leander. So he's trying to stealth up, you can tell, but I don't think it's going to work. I think you're going to die. Yep. So 1 normal pen. Now we need to get moving again because, well, well, for 1, there's deep water torpedoes, and 2, we are in the middle, and there's a Fuso, a Congo, a Scharnhorst, a Colorado, and a Kajimata, all wanting a piece of me right now. Now, of these ships to shoot at, which ones are my priority? Well, there isn't really any one that is a priority. It's whichever is presenting the best profile and that I can actually engage, which at the moment is the Fuso. Now you can see there we had a main turret get incapacitated there from the Colorado, which somehow managed to hit me, but, well, it is a Colorado. We should probably give him a little bit of credit. That ship used to be absolutely terrible. Fuso now shooting at me. Not doing a whole lot of damage, thankfully. So one other thing that I would like to point out is that, well, there's a destroyer back there trying to get people to engage it. And shooting AP, yes, I know. Occasionally you'll get that normal pen and it'll all be worth it. Congo is still cruising in the middle, but at this point we're going to sail out a little bit. This Congo, I'm going to see if I can't bait this Colorado out so that the Congo can get involved. However, I go full Notzer. This is actually becoming a little bit more common for me to end up, you know, basically beaching myself unintentionally. And a large part of the reason for that is because I am so focused on what I'm doing that I often forget to check my surroundings. So that is something that I am actively working on. Situational awareness is very, very key. At this point, the enemy, though, is all basically on the other side of this island. The destroyers down there, it's not a huge deal. The Colorado shoots HE at a Congo. But by now, my main guns are finally back on target, and we are still shooting AP, and still getting very good clusters of groupings like that, and doing pretty good damage. We got 3 kills, we're up to 93,473 damage. Not a whole lot else really to do except for to continue to engage these battleships. And this is very much the playstyle that King George V has, except for I know a lot of people really like to use HE for some reason. Well, there's another salvo out on the Colorado. 2,100 damage. Somehow, a normal pen got thrown in there. Those pesky 0 damage normal pens. So now we've got ourselves Mr. Schlachtschief Bismarck coming out. It's Bismarck spelled wrong. It's missing its C in there. Well, Scharnhorst is incremental armor scheme, which means that if I can get shots off on that land in the bow, even that can do quite a lot of damage. And there's a Confederate and about 4,500 damage. Still trying to bait out these ships to come one at a time, and this is kind of the downside that the enemy team is facing right now. They're not really getting... Whoa. Camera freaked out a little bit there. They're not really getting the opportunity to successfully engage all of us because they're not putting together a concerted effort, whereas we really are. So we're focusing down the Scharnhorst, and ooh, yikes. Okay, 2 normal pens for basically 7 grand. You can see we're just adding just a little bit of damage every time, and we're getting a lot of broadside targets, which is really beneficial. He's got 3,000 hit points, and down goes yet another ship. We've got 4 kills. That means there's a Kraken on the line. 119,664 damage. Still have this Gajimata here, which is a bad thing. If this Gajimata could remain stealthed up, there would be nothing that we could do to get rid of him. 710 hit points for the Kraken! Ooh, he disappears. No, thank you, Dispersion. Although the Atlanta did manage to land a shell, so curious to see how many hit points he doesn't have left. Fuso. Oh, do I want to go charging at the Gajimata at this point? I don't know. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of this, but, well, we're going to have to. We're just going to have to make decisions on what we can and can't engage. So we're going to try and engage this Fuso, maybe get ourselves that kill. Of course, leveraging the 6 barrels up front. And an overpen for 1,050 damage. Definitely overshot him a bit. I am also alternating and trying to WASD as best I can. Really waiting for this Atlanta to catch up and get up here. Because the Atlanta is going to be the key success to dealing with... Whoa! Okay, so we did switch to HE finally, and... Well, no flood. And completely missed that Fuso. That's what I get for shooting HE at battleships in a battleship. And of course, I'm also turning at the same time at which incoming fire is coming in and taking damage as a result. So we're going to complete this turn, and the reason we're going to complete this turn is that Gajimata does still exist. And for whatever reason, we were not willing to kill him or go chase him down. I think the Atlanta is kind of trying to maneuver so that he can. And there's a fire on the Fuso in the Butler Ward. 126,393 damage. This Fuso is turning broadside. Oh, well, we'll go ahead and shoot this salvo. Reality is, well, he repaired it, so now he's going to burn to death if I get another fire. Like that one. Because, you know, why not? Royal Navy HE is totally balanced. Royal Navy Battleship HE is totally balanced. So now it's like, well, I'm sure I will get the kill on this, right? Because let's face it, oop, there's high caliber. Let's face it, you know, it is a Fuso. His repair is obviously down. Oop, he's down to 6,000 hit points. Oh, he's repairing. I don't care if I beach myself this time. I want this kill. I want the Kraken. He's got 8,000 hit points. Come on, let's get another fire. Oh, how about 2 more fires? Let me get the kill. He's got 1,100 hit points. Let me get the kill. And denied. Oh well, we 141,592 damage. We've got all 3 caps, and we're healing up a little bit. Now at this point, I was really expecting, deep water torpedoes, but I'm not detected. And Gajimada's torpedoes are only like 8k, so we don't have to worry too much about that. Win greater than Kraken. That's true. That's definitely true. Although having the Kraken would have also been nice. Alright, so what's left is a Congo, the Gajimada, and, well, let's just say that this battle is going to definitely slow down a bit from here. Looks like we're going to point out, got 3 minutes left in the battle. So overall, you can see the usefulness of Duke of York, and its playstyle is very similar to King George V, except for the addition of Hydro just allows you to be a little bit more aggressive because you've got a lot more warning to deal with torpedoes, you've got a lot more warning to deal with destroyers hiding in smoke at close range. So there's a lot of advantages to Duke of York's current predicament. And I do think Duke of York is a better ship than King George V, but only just a little bit more so. And as I demonstrate in this video, AP is definitely viable. 141,592 damage, 4 kills, 2,269 base XP. Oh, talk about a good game. Anyway, Duke of York, not a bad ship. I hope this helps you guys out. Like, comment, subscribe if you guys haven't already. And thank you for watching.